You've seen this person. Someone mentions a military conflict at dinner, and their entire body rejects the conversation. They physically recoil. Their face flushes. They interrupt. We're talking about human beings dying. Not debating, not discussing, shutting it down. While others might say war is complicated, or sometimes it's necessary, this person can't even entertain that framework. The thought of justifying violence makes them feel sick. They'll leave the room during war movies. They can't watch the news when conflicts escalate, and when someone argues for military intervention, even with careful reasoning, they don't hear strategy. They hear someone advocating for murder. If you've ever wondered what creates a mind that can't tolerate violence, even as an abstract concept, the answer is buried in how their brain learned to survive fear when they were young enough that survival felt like magic, not strategy. The mechanism is called communion-based threat learning, and it happens before age 7, before language can fully capture experience. At that developmental stage, your brain is desperately trying to answer one question that determines everything. What keeps me safe when I'm small and the world is big and dangerous? Some children learn through experience that being tough keeps them safe, that showing weakness invites harm, that strength and boundaries protect you. But the child who will grow up to viscerally hate war learns something different. They learn that connection keeps them safe, that when someone understands them, bad things stop happening. That empathy prevents pain. Maybe they had a caregiver who could de-escalate just by listening. Maybe they watched conflict dissolve when someone finally felt heard. Maybe the moment they felt most safe in their entire childhood was the moment someone chose gentleness over anger. Their brain doesn't just remember this cognitively, it encodes it into their threat detection system at the level of nervous system wiring. Safety equals connection, danger equals disconnection, and violence. Violence is the complete obliteration of connection, which means it's the obliteration of the only thing their brain trusts to keep them alive. This isn't happening in their prefrontal cortex, where rational thought lives. This is happening in their amygdala and autonomic nervous system, the parts of the brain that don't think, they react. When someone with this wiring encounters war, even just the concept of war, their amygdala doesn't process it as a geopolitical event happening far away. It processes it as the total failure of the safety mechanism. Imagine if your home security system was the only thing standing between you and constant danger, and then you watched it catastrophically fail. That's the felt experience in their body when they encounter organized violence. It's not melodrama, it's threat response. Their nervous system is screaming that the foundation of safety has collapsed. And here's what makes this wiring so specific. It creates what psychologists call an obligate empathy response. They can't turn off their ability to feel what others feel. Show them footage of a bombing, and they don't see enemy casualties or collateral damage. They see a child who had a name, a mother who loved them, a future that just ended. Their brain cannot perform the psychological distancing that allows most people to tolerate violence when it's framed as necessary. The mechanism that lets other people say, "This is terrible, but strategically required," doesn't function in their nervous system. When they hear acceptable losses, their brain translates it to "we're deciding whose child's death we're willing to accept," and their entire system revolts. Watch them in conversations about conflict, and you'll see the physical signatures of this wiring. They can't maintain eye contact when someone defends military action. Their breathing becomes shallow. They start fidgeting, picking at their fingers, looking for an exit. They're not being dramatic. Their body is experiencing what it learned in childhood to experience, that when connection breaks down, they're in danger. Every sentence that rationalizes violence is triggering their threat response because their nervous system coded rationalized harm as the moment before safety disappears. Maybe they had a parent who explained why the punishment was necessary right before delivering it. Maybe they watched someone justify cruelty with logic. Whatever the specific experience, their brain learned, when people start explaining why harm is acceptable, you are no longer safe. They use specific linguistic patterns that reveal this wiring. They can't say "the enemy." They say "people on the other side." They can't say "neutralize the threat." They say "kill human beings." They compulsively rehumanize every abstraction because their threat response system requires them to maintain the sense of connection to survive psychologically. When someone uses strategic military language, they translate it back to human terms out loud, almost involuntarily. You mean drop bombs on neighborhoods where children sleep? This isn't political grandstanding. This is their nervous system refusing to allow the disconnection that makes violence tolerable. Here's what else reveals this wiring. They become intensely distressed, not just by violence, but by other people's calm acceptance of violence. If someone discusses a military campaign the way they discuss a business strategy, the person who hates war doesn't just disagree with the position. They experience that emotional distance as dangerous. Because in their developmental learning, the moment people stopped feeling each other's pain was the moment harm became possible. So when they encounter someone analyzing casualties without visible emotion, their threat system interprets it as, this person has lost the capacity for connection, which means they're capable of anything. It's not a moral judgment. It's a threat assessment their nervous system is making automatically. Now here's the deeper pattern that shaped this mind. Somewhere in their early development, they learned that they could stop bad things from happening by helping people understand each other. Maybe they were the family mediator, the child who could get feuding parents to see each other's perspective. Maybe they discovered that when they helped their sibling explain their feelings, the punishment didn't come. Maybe they found that being the emotional translator, the empathy bridge, the one who reminded everyone of their shared humanity, maybe that role gave them the only power they had in a world where they were small and vulnerable. And it worked, not perfectly, not always, but enough that their brain encoded it as truth. I can prevent harm by preserving connection. That's not just a belief. That became their survival identity. They are the person who stops violence by refusing to let people forget each other's humanity. And every war, every conflict, every act of organized violence is evidence that they failed at the one job their nervous system gave them. This is why their reaction to war includes not just horror, but personal desperation. They're not just observing violence. They're experiencing the failure of their core survival mechanism, which leaves them feeling existentially powerless and unsafe. The emotional conflict underneath their hatred of war is this. They need to believe that empathy is powerful enough to prevent harm, but the existence of war is constant evidence that it's not. Every military conflict is a personal refutation of their deepest psychological conviction. So, they have two choices. They can accept that empathy has limits, that some people won't respond to understanding, that connection alone cannot prevent all violence, which would mean accepting that their primary survival tool is insufficient and they are fundamentally unsafe. Or they can intensify their belief that war is always preventable, always the result of insufficient empathy, always avoidable if only people tried harder to understand each other. Most people with this wiring choose the second option because the first option is psychologically unbearable. So they become more committed to pacifism, more insistent that violence is never the answer, more convinced that anyone who supports military action must lack empathy or be brainwashed by propaganda. This isn't intellectual dishonesty. This is psychological self-preservation. Their entire sense of safety in the world depends on maintaining the belief that human connection is powerful enough to prevent the worst outcomes. Letting go of that belief would mean confronting a level of existential vulnerability they're not equipped to handle. But here's what this orientation actually represents, and why it's not weakness. The mind that viscerally hates war is a mind that never learned to dissociate from others' suffering. Most people develop the psychological capacity to emotionally distance themselves from harm that doesn't directly threaten them. It's an adaptive mechanism that prevents constant overwhelm. You can know intellectually that terrible things are happening while maintaining enough emotional separation to function. The person who hates war never fully developed that capacity, or developed it weakly. They remained psychologically porous to others' pain. This makes daily life harder for them. They can't watch the news without absorbing the suffering. They can't read about atrocities without carrying the weight. But it also means they're carrying something the rest of us risk losing: the immediate, felt knowledge that the person being harmed is as real as we are. In a world where it's psychologically easy to categorize people as other and rationalize their suffering, the person who can't do that serves a function. They're the ones who won't let casualties become statistics. They're the ones who remember that every enemy combatant was someone's child, someone's beloved, someone who wanted to live. When strategists talk about acceptable losses, the person who hates war is in the room saying, there are no acceptable losses. Every loss is a person. That voice is necessary. Without it, societies drift into conflicts where the human cost becomes abstract, where we talk about thousands dead the way we talk about budget figures. Their wiring makes them vulnerable to exploitation by bad actors who don't share their commitment to empathy. It makes them underestimate genuine threats because their brain is oriented toward finding the human connection that resolves conflict, even when that connection isn't possible. It can make them advocate for positions that leave vulnerable people unprotected because they struggle to accept that force is sometimes the only thing standing between the innocent and annihilation. These are real limitations, but the limitation doesn't erase the value. They're protecting something that societies need protected, the recognition that every human being killed in war is a tragedy, not a calculation. That violence should feel unbearable, not strategic. That the moment we become comfortable with killing is the moment we've lost something essential. Here's what you can understand if you are this person. Your visceral rejection of violence is your nervous system trying to restore the connection it learned keeps you safe. You're not broken for feeling war as a personal violation. You're wired to preserve human bonds, and violence is the ultimate severing of those bonds. But recognize that not everyone's nervous system encoded the same survival data. Some people learned that safety comes from strength, from boundaries, from the willingness to use force against those who won't respond to empathy. When they support military action, they're not monsters. They're running different survival software built from their lived experience, that refusing to meet force with force is what enables greater harm. You don't have to agree. You don't have to suppress your horror at violence, but understanding that the person across from you is also trying to prevent suffering, just through a different mechanism their brain trusts, might make you less likely to shut down entirely when they speak. Your orientation is valid, and it's also incomplete. Theirs is valid and also incomplete. The full picture requires both. People who refuse to accept violence as normal, and people who refuse to be defenseless against those who choose violence anyway. Here's what you can understand if you're not this person, but encounter them. When someone reacts to war with what seems like disproportionate emotional intensity, they're not performing moral superiority. They're experiencing actual nervous system distress because their threat detection system is wired to interpret violence as the failure of their primary safety mechanism. When they say, "How can you justify this?" they're not attacking your intelligence. They're expressing real fear that the social fabric they trust to keep humans alive has disintegrated. You don't have to adopt their position, but understanding that their opposition comes from a deeply encoded survival strategy rather than naive idealism might make their intensity less irritating and more comprehensible. The person who hates war is trying to protect the belief that empathy is powerful, that connection can prevent suffering, that humans are capable of choosing understanding over violence. Without people fiercely protecting that belief, societies accept brutality as inevitable. Progress toward less violence, more human rights, broader moral circles, all of that requires people who refuse to normalize harm, who insist we can do better, who won't accept war as an unchangeable feature of existence. But they're also protecting themselves from an unbearable reality that if empathy can't prevent the worst outcomes, the world is more chaotic and dangerous than they can tolerate. Both things are true. Their orientation serves societies, and it serves their psychological survival. What shapes a mind that resists violence? Early experiences that taught them safety, lives in connection, that understanding prevents harm, that when people truly see each other, the impulse to hurt dissolves. They learned this when they were small enough that it felt like discovering the law of gravity, and their nervous system never stopped believing it, even when the world keeps providing evidence that connection alone cannot prevent every cruelty. They carry the hope that humans can be better, that empathy can grow, that we don't have to accept violence as our nature. That hope costs them something. It means feeling the weight of every failure, every war, every moment that proves empathy has limits. But it also means they'll never stop being the voice that says, "These are people, not numbers. This is tragedy, not strategy. We are capable of better." That's not weakness. That's a kind of strength most of us can't sustain, the strength to feel the full weight of others' suffering and refuse to look away.